If you follow the most famous rule in personal finance today, you are effectively choosing to be broke by the time you retire. For nearly 100 years, we have been told that saving 10% of our income is the golden ticket to the American dream. It was the bedrock of George Clayson's Richest Man in Babylon back in 1926, and it became the unquestioned gospel for financial planners in the 90s. But as we look toward the economic landscape of 2026, the 10% rule isn't just outdated, it's a mathematical suicide mission. The world has changed, the math has shifted, and the safety nets have been incinerated. If you are still putting away just 10 cents of every dollar and expecting a comfortable future, you aren't being prudent. You are being targeted by an economy that has outgrown your strategy. Today, we are going to look at why that number is a trap and what the new reality actually demands. Before we dive into the spreadsheet carnage, I want to make a deal with you. Most people will scroll past this because the truth about 2026 is uncomfortable. But staying for the next 20 minutes is quite literally the best ROI you will get on your time this week. Understanding these shifts now is the difference between a retirement spent in a beach chair and one spent working a service job at age 75. I've spent weeks digging through Federal Reserve data and housing reports to see exactly where the disconnect lies. If you find this data-driven approach helpful, hit that subscribe button. It tells the algorithm that financial literacy actually matters in a sea of clickbait. We are building a community here that looks at the hard numbers, even when they hurt. Now, let's look at why your parents' advice worked for them, but will fail you. To understand why 10% is broken, we have to go back to 1990. Imagine it is 35 years ago. The median household income is just under $30,000. That sounds low to us now, but here is the kicker. The median home price was only about $123,000. In 1990, a house cost about 4 times what the average family earned in a year. If you saved 10% of your check back then, you were participating in an entirely different financial ecosystem. You weren't just saving for a rainy day, you were building on top of a massive foundation that most people today have never even seen. There was a sense of proportionality between what you earned and what the world cost. Rent was a transition phase, not a life sentence. And the tools available to a regular saver were so much more powerful than the zero-interest environments we have navigated recently. In that world, the 10% rule wasn't just a suggestion, it was a verified path to success because the tailwinds were at your back. In 1990, you didn't even have to be a sophisticated investor to win. You could walk into a local bank and get a certificate of deposit or a basic savings account that yielded 7 or 8%. Think about that for a second. You could literally save your way to wealth with zero risk to your principal. You didn't have to worry about stock market volatility or learning how to read a balance sheet. You just put your 10% into the bank, let the high interest rates of the era do the heavy lifting, and watched your balance grow. Beyond that, a huge portion of the workforce still had access to defined benefit pensions. That 10% you were saving was just the cherry on top of a guaranteed income stream provided by your employer. Your retirement wasn't a solo mission, it was a partnership between you, your company, and a banking system that actually paid you to keep your money there. That is the world where the 10% rule was born, and it worked perfectly. Now, let's fast forward to the projections for 2026. The financial architecture hasn't just changed, it has been completely redesigned, and not in your favor. Today, that same median home price has soared past $400,000, while median incomes haven't even doubled. We went from a house costing 4 times your income to costing 6 or 7 times your income. In some cities, that ratio is now 10 to 1. But here is the part that really stings. The safety nets are gone. Pensions have been replaced by the 401k, which means the entire responsibility for your survival in old age has shifted from the employer to you. You are now your own pension fund manager, your own risk officer, and your own investment scout. If you are still using the 10% rule from 1990, you are trying to win a modern game using a rulebook from a version of the world that no longer exists. The core triad of expenses, housing, healthcare, and education, has fundamentally broken the old math. While we all feel the sting of grocery prices, there is a silent killer that the 10% rule ignores: asset inflation. This is the rising cost of the things that actually make you wealthy, like stocks, real estate, and businesses. Over the last decade, these assets have compounded much faster than wages. The cost to buy into the game of wealth is higher than it has ever been. In the 90s, 10% of your salary could buy a significant slice of the S&P 500 or a decent down payment on a starter home. In 2026, that same 10% buys a much smaller fraction of those wealth-generating machines. You are running up a down escalator. By the time you save enough for a traditional down payment, the house price has moved another $50,000 out of reach. This is why the old advice feels like it's gaslighting you. It's because the math of wealth capture has been tilted toward those who already own assets, leaving the 10% saver in the dust. If you think the housing market is tough, wait until you look at the rent numbers for the coming year. We are entering the era of the permanent renter class. Data from Harvard shows that half of all American renters are now cost-burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their pay on just keeping a roof over their heads. A quarter of renters are spending over 50%. In 1990, rent was a stepping stone. Today, it is a wealth-destroying anchor. When half of your money goes to a landlord, you are building his equity instead of your own. The 10% rule assumes you have a manageable cost of living that allows for a surplus. But if your rent is 45% of your take-home pay, and your groceries and utilities take another 30%, that 10% isn't a strategy, it's a desperate leftover. You can't outsave a catastrophic housing market with 1920s logic. To bridge the gap in 2026, you don't just need to save, you need to fundamentally restructure how much of your wealth you capture before it leaks out to someone else's mortgage. Inflation isn't just the temporary spike we saw a couple of years ago. It is a permanent compounding force that most people underestimate. Think about it this way. To have the same purchasing power as $50,000 in 1990, you would need nearly $120,000 today. The 10% rule assumes a linear world, but inflation is exponential. Every dollar you put away today is losing its strength while you sleep. By 2026, the compounding effect of the last 5 years of price increases will be fully baked into the economy. If you save 10% of a stagnant wage, the future purchasing power of that money will be a shadow of what you expect. To maintain the exact same standard of living 30 years from now, you actually have to oversave today to compensate for the fact that a dollar in 2055 might only buy what a quarter buys today. It is a silent tax on your discipline, and 10% isn't a big enough shield to stop it. Here is a weirdly dark reality. We are living longer than ever, but our financial plans haven't been updated to pay for the extra time. Medical science is keeping us alive, but it is doing so at an astronomical cost. For a couple retiring in 2026, estimates suggest they will need over $300,000 just for healthcare expenses in retirement. And get this, that doesn't even include long-term care or nursing homes. If you earn $80,000 a year and save 10%, it would take you nearly 40 years of perfect saving just to cover your baseline medical bills, leaving exactly $0 for food, travel, or a place to live. We have created a longevity paradox, where the extra years we've gained are the most expensive years of our lives. The 10% rule was designed for a world where retirement lasted 10 or 15 years. Now it needs to last 30. If you don't increase your savings rate, you aren't planning for a long life. You're planning for a long period of poverty. I know this sounds like a lot of heavy news, but stick with me because we are about to pivot into the solution. Before we do, I want to invite you to join the Optimizers. That is our channel membership. If you hit that join button, you get custom badges and priority for your questions in the comments. It's for the people who want to go deeper into the data and move beyond the basic save 10% fluff. Your support helps me keep these deep dives independent and research heavy. Now, I want to show you the actual math of failure, the spreadsheet that finally convinced me that 10% is a lie. We're going to take a typical $75,000 earner and see what happens to them over 35 years. The results are a wake-up call for anyone relying on standard advice. Let's run the hard numbers. Suppose you earn the median household income of $75,000. You are disciplined, you are consistent, and you save exactly 10%, $7,500 a year. You invest that money into a diversified portfolio, and you get a solid, inflation-adjusted 5% real return for 35 years. On paper, at the end of that journey, you have about $677,000. Now, to a lot of people, 700 grand sounds like a massive win. It sounds like you've made it. But this is where the math of the real world crashes into the math of your dreams. We have to look at the safe withdrawal rate. The gold standard for financial planning is the 4% rule. If you take 4% of your $677,000, you get $27,000 a year. That is your income. Ask yourself, can you live on $27,000 a year in the economy of 2026 and beyond? The answer is a resounding no. Most experts agree you need about 80% of your pre-retirement income to maintain your lifestyle. For our $75,000 earner, that's $60,000 a year. Even if Social Security stays exactly as it is today, which is a big if given the trust fund projections for the 2030s, you are still looking at a massive shortfall. If Social Security gives you $20,000 and your portfolio gives you $27,000, you are still $13,000 short every single year. That's over $1,000 a month of lifestyle that just disappears. You'll be forced to move, cut back on healthcare, or keep working a job you likely wanted to leave a decade ago. Saving 10% mathematically guarantees a severe downgrade in your standard of living. It isn't a failure of effort, it's a failure of the formula. Major institutions like Vanguard and Fidelity have quietly realized this and are now moving their suggested minimums to 15%. But even that is optimistic for the 2026 reality. So if 10% is dead and 15% is barely treading water, what is the new standard? For anyone looking to actually thrive in 2026, the new baseline is 25%. I call it the quarter rule. I know that sounds aggressive, especially when rent is high, but there's a mathematical magic that happens when you cross the 20% threshold. First, it forces a level of lifestyle deflation that actually makes your retirement cheaper. If you can live on 75% of your income now, you don't need nearly as much to be happy later. Second, it creates what I call financial velocity. The difference between a 10% savings rate and a 25% savings rate isn't just 2.5 times more money. It's the difference between working for 51 years and working for 32. By moving that needle, you are literally buying back 2 decades of your life. It transforms you from someone who is surviving the economy into someone who is capturing the growth of the entire world. In 2026, saving needs to be renamed to wealth capture. Putting money in a standard bank account is just a slow way to lose purchasing power. Your 25% needs to be split with precision. I recommend a simple hierarchy. The first 5% goes to your cash bridge, a high-yield account for emergencies and peace of mind. The next 10% goes into tax-advantaged accounts like your 401k or Roth IRA, specifically aimed at low-cost index funds that track the total market. The final 10% is where you get aggressive. This is for real estate equity, health savings accounts, or taxable brokerages. You aren't just saving for a rainy day, you are acquiring assets that work while you sleep. The 2026 mandate is to stop being a consumer of the economy and start being an owner of it. When you own the companies and the land, inflation actually becomes a wind in your sails instead of a weight on your back. Now, let's talk about the how. Telling someone to save 25% when their rent is 50% sounds like a joke. To make the math work in 2026, you have to be willing to do what 95% of people won't. The first tool is geographic arbitrage. In the post-pandemic world, your location and your income don't have to be married. If you are living in a high-cost Tier 1 city but earning an average wage, the math will simply never work for you. You are essentially paying a lifestyle tax that makes wealth capture impossible. Moving to a lower-cost area or leveraging remote work to keep a high-cost salary in a low-cost town is the fastest way to jump from a 10% savings rate to 30% overnight. If you can't move, you have to look at house hacking, renting out rooms, or living in a multi-unit property. You cannot outsave a catastrophic housing market by yourself. You have to find a way to make your housing costs look like the 1990s again. There is a limit to how much you can cut, but there is no ceiling to what you can earn. By 2026, the workforce will be split into two groups: those whose jobs are being automated and those who are using automation to become 10 times more productive. To hit a 25% savings rate, you likely need an income pivot. Upskilling in areas like data analysis, technical trades, or complex problem solving isn't just for career people anymore, it's a survival requirement. If your wages have been stagnant while your grocery bill has doubled, skipping lattes isn't the solution. The solution is an aggressive 30% increase in your income through job hopping and certifications. And then, this is the vital part, intentionally not letting your lifestyle grow with that raise. If you earn an extra $20,000 and put all of it into your investments, you have fixed your financial future in a single year. That is how you beat the 2026 squeeze. The hardest part of this isn't the math, it's the psychology. We are all victims of anchoring bias. We've heard 10% so many times that it feels safe. Our parents said it, the evening news says it, and even some banks still print it on their brochures. Breaking that anchor feels like admitting the world is more dangerous than we want it to be. But in 2026, comfort is the enemy of security. We have to replace the psychology of what is easy with the psychology of what is required. If you can't get to 25% today, don't panic and do nothing. Use the 1% auto-escalation. Set your 401k to increase by just 1% every 6 months. It's small enough that you won't feel the drop in your paycheck, but over 3 years, it will transform you from a standard saver into a wealth-building machine. You have to automate your discipline so you don't have to rely on your willpower. The 10% rule is a relic. It belongs in the 1990s alongside dial-up internet and high-yield savings accounts of the local branch. As we head into 2026, the rules of the game have been rewritten by housing shortages, compounding inflation, and the total shift of retirement risk onto the individual. You are now the captain of your own ship, and the waters are choppier than they used to be. But here is the good news. Once you accept the new math, you gain a level of clarity that most people never find. You stop hoping for a miracle and start building a fortress. Target that 25%. Reject the car payment trap. Upskill relentlessly. And most importantly, stop listening to advice that was designed for a world that no longer exists. Your financial salvation is in your own hands. I'm Tom, this is Tom Talks Money, and I'll see you in the next one. I want to hear from you now. What is the biggest barrier you are facing to hitting that 25% mark? Is it the rent in your city, the cost of childcare, or just the sheer psychological weight of it all? Let's treat the comment section as a bit of a data gathering exercise. Read through what others are saying. You might find a strategy for house hacking or a career pivot that you hadn't considered. I'll be down there replying to as many as I can, especially our optimizers. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming deep dive on the specific asset allocations for a high inflation environment. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best time to fix the math was 10 years ago. but the second best time is today.